Sten, we're live.
Hey, thanks, Larry, the Liberty Guy. Welcome to In the Dugout. This is Mike Stenhouse, and it's a bit of a somber day given the news out of Afghanistan today, the loss of American life. Unavoidable, I should say, avoidable loss of life, were it not for the incompetence of this administration. I got to go out and lower my flag to half-mast. And I'm wearing my blank cap today for In the Dugout because it's just a blank stare of disbelief I have at what's happening not only in our country, here in America and in Afghanistan and throughout the world, but also here in Rhode Island with governors declaring unlawful executive powers and General Assembly sitting back and doing nothing, and all the while things get worse here in Rhode Island, things get worse here in America, and things get worse across the world. It's really a somber day. I'm sorry. I just feel that way. But we have important topics to talk about today. But let me officially start by saying Godspeed. God bless those killed and injured today in Afghanistan. For our American compatriots who are trapped behind enemy lines, again, avoidably, but tragically. The suicide bombings, I fear, will continue out there, and we'll see what happens. All right, you may have read, well, not many of you do anymore, but I had a opinion piece published today in the Providence Journal, and I'm not sure if I shared the right screen with you, so let me try that again. Nope, I didn't. Here we go. And this really sets the basis for our discussion today. Today, we're going to talk a lot about Governor McKee's recently and newly declared second state of emergency after lawmakers stripped him of his powers in the original state. So he just goes ahead and declares another state of emergency. And that has led, obviously, to his mask mandate, which has parent groups upset. And we're also, so this is the backdrop. Go to the Providence Journal, online, in print, wherever you find it. Check out my opinion piece. But again, it's the basis for what we'll be talking about today. Our guest today, we've got three guests today. Will be joining us shortly. Laurie Gaddis Brown. You probably don't know her. She's a Gloucester resident. She's very much in tune with what's happening with that brave school committee earlier this week. But she's also one of the most knowledgeable people about what's going on with critical race theory in our schools from a statewide perspective. So we're going to talk to her about Gloucester and about the groups she's involved with and her work and research on what's going on across our state. I think we're going to be joined by Senator Jessica De La Cruz, who would probably echo what you heard from Charlene Lima on our big news breaking show 2 days ago, where she challenged the governor's, again, what we believe is an unconstitutional second declaration of a state of emergency. Jessica De La Cruz is on record calling for an end to that, as is a Democrat, Charlene Lima, as is Republican Brian Newberry, and I'm sure many others. She'll join us to talk about what's going on with Gloucester and both the statewide. And then we're going to be joined by an attorney, Charles Calenda. Now, you may know that name. He's a lawyer. He's also an announced candidate for Attorney General for next year. And he's going to join us. He's commented publicly on this governor's audacious move to grant himself new executive powers. He'll comment on that as well as what's going on in Gloucester. Next week, we're going to definitely spend at least one of our large part of one of our shows talking to someone from a new group that's been formed called Friends of North Kingston Schools. In addition to the parents who are outraged about critical race theory in that town, there is a recall effort. One of the school committee members, many believe, is not only just a CRT advocate, but a committed socialist, if not communist. There's a recall effort to try to get petition drive and then eventually a special election to have her ousted. So we'll talk to somebody from the Friends of North Kingston Schools. Talking about Afghanistan. again, one of the reasons I have this blank stare of disbelief and therefore the blank cap. This is what Governor McKee did with regard to Afghanistan. When he announced earlier this week at his, I think it is Tuesday press, he announced that he sent a letter to President Biden and said, hey, send us any Afghans, refugees we want. We'll take care of them. You know, I got to admit, our state must be pretty confident with how we can take care of refugees, whether they're legal or illegal immigrants, because we've been doing it with illegal immigrants for years in this state. What do you think all the affordable housing is about? What do you think all this spending is about? All this English as a second language is about? I mean, nobody knows because nobody will tell us. We have enormous amounts of illegal immigrants in this state. And now Governor McKee wants to bring us more. And it's not just the numbers and the cost of it, but it's the potential danger of it because of how the Biden administration is handling this. They're talking about an expedited vetting process to approve which ones can come into America and which Afghan refugees will be sent to Rhode Island. An expedited vetting process from a country full of terrorists. That sounds a little dangerous to me. I think you want to do a more thorough vetting process when you're just stuffing people onto planes. Excuse me, and sending them to America, many of whom apparently are going to be invited to come here to Rhode Island. Somebody's got to stop with this bleeding heart liberalism and really security implications for our state and for, and we're never going to know how this went. I mean, Commander in Chief, here's the picture we see most often of Joe Biden these days. His back to the media, his back to the public. When he finishes his statement, his book, puts away his notes, which he relies on, and turns away and walks away without answering any questions. This is the most untransparent administration ever, and this president obviously doesn't have the capacity to answer questions off the cuff. So that's why we see his back so much. You know, parents are outraged at these mask mandates. They believe they should be the ones who decide whether their kids wear masks at schools. And and it's not because they're being defiant. It's not because they're want to be irresponsible, because they're being responsible. Like, if for anyone who's listened to the show, unlike what the government, our state, the federal government, our Department of Health tells us, local town councils or school committees telling us, there is no evidence that masks stop the spread in any meaningful way. And of course, it depends on which mask. Certainly a cloth covering or the cheap mask you buy at, you know, at drugstores don't work. Maybe if you have one of the really super N95 masks, that might help a little, but certainly just a face covering does not stop. And parents know this. They've done their homework. They're speaking the truth. They're acting on the truth. But yet state officials stick their heads in the sand. The local officials stick their head in the sand and are perpetuating these silly mask mandates that some studies show may even be harmful to the kids physically. We even know, we know they could be harmful to kids psychologically. So, you know, they had, apparently the state had a town hall meeting last night with the Department of Health. The question of mask mandates came up, and the state cannot cite the studies, as Dr. Boston on our show has so often said. They cannot cite studies that prove that masks work. They just vaguely say, oh, state, local, international data supports it. The science is clearly not settled on that issue. And but yet these laws are being put forth. And things are starting to get out of hand. You know, temperatures rising, passions are boiling over. In North Kingston, I think 2 nights ago or Monday night, they had a school committee meeting to consider a mask mandate for that school district. Well, a lot of parents came. All participants were required. Listen to what happened here. Everybody in the school committee meeting, a participant or a member of the audience had to wear a mask, and many of the parents apparently didn't wear masks. So there was some debate about that, and the school committee says, well, we're going to suspend the meeting, put their meeting in recess until everybody starts wearing their masks. And they called the police. And apparently 5 police officers came, but they didn't do anything. They just stood there. They didn't want to get involved, but they were there as a threat. Well, what happened? This is interesting. The meeting continued without the school committee members. Parents got up and talked. Doctors got up and talked. So they were having the debate technically offline. And finally, the school committee said, boy, we better get back in the game. So they resumed the meeting. The parents agree, well, we'll at least put our masks around our necks or droop it down on our chins or whatever. And the meeting continued. And yes, they did pass a mask mandate for students in North Kingston, except for when they're out at recess. So, you know, it's really boiling over. We're going to talk about today in just a few minutes with our guests, what happened in Gloucester. We're going to talk to a Gloucester resident. We're going to talk to a senator, and we're going to talk to a lawyer who's running for attorney general next year about that. But the question I want to know is this. The General Assembly, as we've discussed on this show, ended the original state of emergency declared by Governor Raimondo and extended by Governor McKee back in the budget that passed and was enacted in early July. Now the governor is declaring a new state of emergency based on the new Delta variant, saying it's a new and different emergency than the original COVID emergency. That's very dubious and shaky legal ground, and that will be challenged, I'm quite sure. In fact, I had a discussion with a national legal group today who was looking to weigh in on this. According to them, this kind of declaration of a state of emergency, not extending an original one, but after one has been ended, starting a new state, that may be the first of its kind in America. And the audaciousness of McKee to play that crazy card may come back to burn him. But here's my question. Was the General Assembly leadership complicit in this? You heard from Representatives Newberry and Lima 2 days ago that they believe that their law that they implemented to end the governor's emergency was end run, that the governor provided an end run on them. But I wonder if leadership was in on this. I wonder if all along, here's the way the scenario went. All right, Governor, look, we got this $1 billion of federal money coming our way. You're not going to get to spend it by yourself. We, the General Assembly, want to have the leading role in that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to end your state of emergency temporarily. We'll make it seem like it's permanent, just so we can have the authority to spend the money. And we're going to call a special session to spend that money to decide how to spend it in the fall. And you know what? That's what they did. Then the agreement might have gone something like, but if you want to reclaim and reissue a state of emergency and reclaim executive powers later on in the summer, go right ahead. We won't stand in your way. And that's exactly what happened. So it's my suspicion the General Assembly leadership co-conspired with the governor to get the General Assembly what they demanded, the rights to spend the $1 billion coming their way from the federal government, but yet give the governor what he wants, which is the unilateral executive authority, along with a promise from the General Assembly leaders, and we won't stand in your way. And all that has happened. And all that has led to the local problems, the parent groups popping up, the fights, the shutting down of meetings, the threatened lawsuits that we're about to talk about today. All right, so in that regard, let's bring on a local expert from Gloucester. Her name is Laurie Gaddis Barrett. Okay, joining me now is one of those Gloucester citizens very concerned about mask mandates and the governor's executive orders, Laurie Gaddis Barrett. Laurie, welcome to In the Dugout. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Mike. I'm awfully excited to be here with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, I got to tell you, based on the information you sent me in our prior discussions, I've got to say, you might be the most knowledgeable person in the entire state that has a statewide view of what's happening with critical race theory in various schools throughout the state, how the Department of Education is pushing it down, what complaints, are happening with challenges to executive powers. We're going to talk about some of the amazing things you're involved with, but that's how I want to introduce you. As far as, at least you're the most knowledgeable person of anyone I've ever talked to. Okay, so let's put it that way. All right, you're involved with two groups. And not only you a concerned Gloucester citizen, but tell us about the two parent groups that you're involved with.
Right. So I am the Rhode Island chapter president for No Left Turn in Education. And what that group does is help educate parents who want to know more about critical race theory and how it might embed itself in a curriculum and how to actually find that information out using APRA requests and understanding what their rights are under the Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
The other group I'm involved in is called Stop School Indoctrination Now. And they do many of the same
Now that
things.
group was formed by Representative Patricia Morgan, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Okay.
And that group, well, No Left Turn in Education really hasn't taken up the mask fight, so to speak.
Okay, yeah.
They definitely support parent rights. And the difference between them and Stop School Indoctrination is that Stop School Indoctrination Now definitely covers everything with regard to parents' rights. And so my work mostly with the mask issue has been through Stop School Indoctrination Now.
All right. So we literally could spend a whole hour with you with all the information you have and you sent us. But today our challenge is try to get through maybe 5 or 6 topics in about 5 or 6 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
And then we want to bring on our guests, and I promise we'll have you back to expand. But our guests are waiting right now. Senator De La Cruz is waiting. Charles Calenda, the attorney and AG candidate, is waiting. We'll have them join us in 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, let's start with a statewide view. And let's start with critical race theory.
Okay.
Is there any question in your mind, based on, again, we can't show everybody everything you have, that the Department of Education, in conjunction with teachers unions, which nationally have openly admitted support of CRT, are behind this curriculum push in Rhode Island school districts? Is there any doubt in your mind?
No question.
And do you think you could prove that if we did that on a later show?
Yes.
All right. And okay, we'll get into that in a later show. Let's take a town based on the towns, let's just maybe pick a half a dozen towns just to give our viewers what's going on. Where do you know that CRT is happening? Of course, they don't call it that, right? They call it diversity and equity inclusion councils, or they call it race equity theories, or whatever they call it. But where are you convinced that some form of CRT is happening in the state from what you're aware of?
So the biggest clue that parents might cue into first would be if you hear the words anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, culturally responsive teaching is coming to the forefront, also social emotional learning. And so we're seeing all of those buzzwords used in, primarily South Kingstown, also in North Kingstown, and Chariho has a specific task force that they're working on finding out more about. And of course, the debate rages on in Westerly.
Westerly. Now, I got a note today from a friend in Jamestown. They're with the Taxpayers Association of Jamestown. And I'm reading from her email. The Taxpayers Association of Jamestown has reviewed the current curriculum content, did not find any direct reference to CRT in its curriculum nor its materials. But direct reference, that's a tricky thing, right? That's probably never a direct reference. Is that true?
It almost certainly will not be a direct reference. You're going to see the words I mentioned before.
So I say that because that's a lesson that everybody needs to understand. Don't refer to it as critical race theory. We heard it with Nicole Solis on the radio, oh, the one radio host, well, the school district claims that critical race theory is not being taught. No, it's not being taught by name, but it's being taught under so many other monikers, right?
Right. So what we call that is, critical race theory has many different tenets and pillars. And, the buzzwords that I mentioned earlier are what you see when critical race theory is taught in practice.
Okay. Now we know that this is happening. They tried to deny that any of this, right, is going on in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
Then the national unions blew their cover and said, no, we openly support critical race theory in schools. But further evidence is an article you sent me. Apparently there's something called the Zinn Education Project.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked teachers to take a pledge, right? To say what?
To essentially say that they were pledging to teach the tenets and pillars of critical race theory, whether or not it was against the law in whatever state they came from. Now, the date of the article that I sent you, as I think back in earlier in June, that pledge project has continued, and they are actually, I think they're up over 6,000 signatures now. So the list of names on that article is a little outdated. If you actually went to the Zinn Education Project website.
All right, we'll put that updated list on next time we have you on. But here is just a sampler. So this is just a sampling by city and town of teachers that are pledged to teach the principles of critical race theory. You can see Providence has many teachers, a few here in Rumford and whatnot. But this is a state by state. So again,
the important thing to know about that list is those are the teachers' hometowns. They may actually teach in a different district.
Those are their hometowns. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
got it. All right. So let's, next time we have you on, let's look at that updated list. But the point being, this is real. Parents are not making this up like the left claims, right?
Exactly.
All right. Let's talk about Gloucester, of which you're a resident, right? You're a resident of Gloucester.
A very proud resident.
Yeah, you've been monitoring the school committee meetings there very closely. You know many of the school committee members. Fortunately, in Gloucester, you've got a pretty, at least conservative school committee, right? There. And they voted on Monday night. Well, they had a bunch of motions. So why don't you describe what happened in Gloucester and why it's important?
So the Gloucester School Committee, which covers K through 5, 2 elementary schools within the town of Gloucester, met in executive session, and they came back with 4 motions. The first motion was to authorize legal counsel to move forward with a complaint against the Council of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Which about 2 weeks ago said that if a school district doesn't have a mask mandate, they could have their funding withheld from the state, right?
That's right. So we're going to move forward with a complaint for Open Meetings Act violation. And they authorized legal counsel to actually pursue litigation against the council for that threat of withholding litigation. And so the reason those 2 things are important, right? A successful complaint could actually nullify the council's vote. It would have to be determined by the Attorney General, but it could actually nullify the vote, and the Rhode Island Department of Education would not be able to reject any school plan. Now, by the time that all shakes out, it may or may not be over. As far as pursuing litigation, I mean, the education commissioner gave an interview where she threatened to do exactly that, knowing that it was against the advice of that council's.
So the lawyer for that council said this is not constitutional for you to do this, but they did it anyway.
They did it anyway. And they did it anyway.
Okay, what else happened? Tell us about what I call the Swiss cheese mask mandate that Gloucester, and I think that wasn't that cynically done as a poke in the eye to the Department of Education and the governor?
I couldn't speculate as to what was in the hearts and the minds of the school committee, but I can tell you this: there, many parents in the town of Gloucester do not want a mask mandate, and we are highly organized. There are people, though, that do want one, and they think that the school committee really worked hard to, technically comply with the law, but effectively address
Right.
parent
Concerns.
concerns.
And I think they did a great thing. I mean, they issued a mandate, but they allowed enough exemptions where ultimately parents have the choice, right?
Right. There's
Mask
three
your kids if you want. Don't if you file a medical, religious, or conscientious objection if
Right.
you don't, right?
Mhm, that's correct.
So, well, we're going to talk to Charles Calenda in just a minute about that. So, anything else we should know about what we should mention the Gloucester School Committee only deals with K through 5, just like the Foster School Committee only deals with K for 5. Now they passed their own mask mandate by it was 6-0, right? In Gloucester, it was 2-1 for a mask mandate in Foster. But then there's the larger 6 through 12 regional school, Pontiac School District. And have they taken any action yet?
On August 3rd, they had their first reading of their mask policy, which closely, pretty much followed parental choice. That, of course, August 3rd was before all the drama with the Council for Elementary and Secondary Education and the subsequent governor's executive order that has its own problematic authority.
All right, let's bring on first Jessica De La Cruz, the senator from, I know largely Burrillville, I think parts of Gloucester, maybe. Senator, are you with us? And tell us exactly which cities and towns you represent.
I represent the great towns of Gloucester, all of Burrillville, and a portion of North Smithfield.
Okay, welcome back in the dugout. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, you were quoted in the article. Basically, now that as you heard Ms. Gaddis Barrett say that one of the things the town did was to seek legal action, questioning whether or not the governor's new declaration of a state of emergency was legal, and therefore whether this mask mandate was legal. You have openly questioned that. You were mentioned in an article today in the Public's radio. Your views on what the governor has done.
Well, the Senate caucus put out a press release. We feel that it's executive overreach. So what happened with the Glocester School Committee was, the governor had said it was up to each city and town. And I maintain, and I have been talking, on media and with individuals, that we have 39 cities and towns. We are a small state. We are a very diverse state. And what works for Gloucester may not work for Providence, which is why each school committee should have the authority to decide. And they did have the authority to decide. But what happened was, because they didn't do exactly as the governor had wanted, the governor decided, as he said in his press conference, that he was going to do an end around or an end run. And he was going to circumvent their authority and instated a new state of emergency so that he could implement the mask mandate for the entire state.
And again, we believe that was under severe pressure and a complete capitulation to the teachers' union's pressure, because we know they're the ones that wanted the mask mandates. All right, before we bring on Charles Calenda, Senator, do you support, now you just heard Laurie explain all the motions that Gloucester passed. Do you support all those motions that they passed Monday evening? I do.
Again, what works for Gloucester may not work for Providence and vice versa.
Great point.
We have a small, our classroom sizes are smaller. We have more space in the school. So you cannot make these decisions statewide. We should have left it up to each community. And what's happening is the governor is saying, I don't trust you. You're not responsible. You're not intelligent enough to make these decisions. This is an elected body. And come election time, if the parents are unhappy, they can decide at the ballot box.
Great. All right, let's bring in Charles Calenda. Chaz, welcome to In the Dugout.
How you doing, Mike? Thanks for having me.
Now, we're going to forgive all our guests today for not wearing a cap in the dugout. And we know they won't let it happen next time. At least they'll hold one up and display one next time, just for a little team spirit. We're all about team spirit here, okay? So we know you won't let that happen. All right, Chaz, from a legal perspective, you've weighed in, and we'll get to your statement more in depth a little more about the governor's executive overreach, as Senator De La Cruz described it. But your thoughts first on the legality or the legal wisdom of what the town of Gloucester did on Monday evening.
Well, I think the town of Gloucester, what they did is necessary in order for them to have standing to challenge the governor's executive orders, because they're going to be the ones who are going to have their plans and their funds denied by the Rhode Island Department of Education if they submit a plan that does not comply with that governor's orders. So that was the necessary first step. And I agree with Senator De La Cruz that the Rhode Island Department of Education, under Rhode Island General Laws 1697 1.2, does not have the power in and of itself to mandate that. So, if you have to ask me my opinion, I think that they probably went to the governor and said, end the debate and issue an executive order so we don't even have to make these decisions.
Let me ask this of the ladies here, Senator De La Cruz, Laurie. Are any of you concerned that what the Gloucester School Committee did by allowing so many exemptions, at my term, Swiss cheese mask mandate, that might trigger a reaction from the Council of Education, whether they're acting legally or not? Nobody seems to care these days, but whether that could trigger a threat or actual loss of funding to your school district? In other words, do you believe you fully complied with what the Department of Education or the Council of Education is asking?
Well, go ahead. You first, please.
So Mike, of course, this has been a hot topic on the Gloucester Town Facebook page, and overwhelmingly the parent sentiment is we don't care, right? You can't buy our compliance. I can't speak to the legality of it, but I don't believe that the council can appropriately withdraw or withhold those funds.
But do you think you put your town, not you, but do you think the school committee put the town at risk of not receiving those funds by not complying? We're going to get a legal perspective on that from Chaz in a minute, but just from what's the talk around town about that? Do they feel like they're at risk or not?
There are some people in the town that
Okay.
feel like that could be at risk, but there's overwhelming support for our town council. For our school committee.
Okay.
And we were so happy and so proud. And when they announced those motions, the applause in the room was deafening.
Wow. All right. Great to hear. Senator, do you agree with those sentiments, or do you see some risk for the Gloucester K-5 school system?
Well, I think there's always risk. There's always risk when you take a stance. However, I think that during the executive session, I wasn't there, and I don't know what happened in executive session, but they obviously must have spoken to their attorney, and their attorney advised them that this was the appropriate course of action. And they, I'm sure, weighed the risk and the reward benefit of taking this stance.
Charles Calenda, as you read the Council on Education threat, mandate, whatever you want to call it, and as you read the motion that was passed and the mandate that was passed by the town of Gloucester, do you see legal peril ahead for the town with regard to state receiving that state funding? Is there grounds, in other words, for the Council on Education to deny Gloucester state funding, or did they effectively comply?
I would argue that they are actually in effective compliance, because the state law would require that they offer some sort of exemptions or reasonable accommodations, as we call them, in certain situations to these situations, like wearing a mask or getting a vaccine, for example. So I would argue that there is technical compliance. Now, the state or the Rhode Island Department of Education will probably argue that there are enough holes in there, as you called it, the Swiss cheese mask mandate. There may be enough holes that they're not technically in compliance, and you'd have someone that either represents the Department of Education, but much more likely someone like the Attorney General probably trying to take action preemptively to say that you are not in compliance, and we're going to take action to ensure that you don't get your funds. And that's where the risky issue of litigation begins.
Yeah, exactly. Now, do you know the towns, because it was the town solicitor, right, who was authorized to file these complaints and do the exploration? Do you know the town solicitor in Gloucester, Mr. Calenda?
I know of him. I don't work very closely with
Okay.
the town in any specific capacity, but I certainly know them.
All right, Laurie, who is the town solicitor? What's the person's name?
It's a different lawyer for the town than it is for the school committee.
Oh,
And
okay.
you
Sorry,
put
I'm
me on the
sorry.
spot. It begins with an I think.
I
Okay,
think it's David Igliozzi or.
Igliozzi is the town solicitor. The school committee I'm sorry, I don't know.
well,
the
it sounds
name.
like, but either way, all right, so we'll get that person's name, but either way, that person seems to have a heavy burden put on their back. I mean, I was talking to a national legal group this morning who's been looking at executive powers overreach throughout the country. And I think what might have happened, with authorizing your school committee lawyer to do this might also be a first throughout the country. I mean, only in Rhode Island do we stretch the law so much that these kinds of Jessica, excuse me, Senator De La Cruz. I mean, what are we gonna do? How do we stop this, whether it's legislatively or whether it's through executive powers? You guys passed legislation to stop emergency powers in June, and this is what we'll talk in detail with Mr. Calenda in just a few minutes. You guys passed it, and yet the governor completely ignored the law, did an end round, played the lawmakers. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel very strongly that this is an erosion of democratic norms, and we should not be okay with that. We should be, it's like whenever government has power, it never wants to relinquish it back. And, it comes down to me, it's like mothering, right? You don't know what's good for you, but I know what's good for you. And no one likes to be mothered. And again, we have a system of government set up. We have a school committee to make a decision. We have town council to make decisions on the town level. We have a legislature to make laws, and the executive branch does not make laws. So we need to get back to normal because this is day 534 of executive orders. Enough is enough.
And isn't this, when you say normal, what's normal is for parents to teach their kids on a host of issues, for parents to be aware of and have a say of what's going on with their kids' education. That's normal. But yet we have government trying to step in and infringe on parental rights, keep things in the dark, and impose its own values on kids. Ultimately, these parent uprisings, these lawsuits, isn't this ultimately a question of parental rights versus government intrusion? Who wants to weigh in on that?
It is. It is. I'm a mom of 3. And when I see the CRT talk, I'm, anyone that I talk to, I'm very much against it. I want my children judging people based on their character, right? What did Martin Luther King Jr. say? Not on the color of their skin, but the content of that character.
Yep.
Today, that is considered racist talk. And then when it comes to the mask mandate, again, with the whole mothering issue, leave it up to the municipality as we said we would, and trust them to make the right decision. And if they don't make the right decision, then election time is when you can change your representation.
Laurie, one final question for you. You just notified me right before we went on the show that apparently the Attorney General's office has accepted your letter to investigate a complaint you made that the Council on Education, in issuing that threat to withhold funding for any school district that doesn't implement a universal mask mandate, that decision was made and voted on in violations of Open Meetings Act. You sent a letter to the Attorney General, and are you saying today that he basically agreed to investigate?
He did.
How were you notified?
I was notified by email. To be fair, it's not the Attorney General himself, it's the Open Government Unit in his office. And I want to encourage any parent out there, you can do this too. If you have, problems getting your offers, or you have problems with the way that some of your open meetings are run, you can do that too. And if you need help, you find me. We're on Facebook, we're on the internet. I'll help.
All right, so we're going to talk to Charles Calenda about this in just a second. We'll get into some legalities here, but I want to thank Laurie, Gaddis, Barrett, Senator Jessica De La Cruz for joining us today, for weighing in. Listen, we can beat this. We're in the right on this. Thank you for being outspoken. So many people believe like we do, but are afraid to speak out. Thank you for having the courage, both of you, to come on the show and discuss it. We'll get you on In the Dugout again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Charles Calenda. So let's follow up on this Open Meetings Act letter that Laurie Gaddis Brown just talked about. She's claiming, and I don't know if have you looked into this at all, by the way?
I've heard about the Open Meetings Act violation that was filed. I
Okay.
did not know that there had been an acceptance of the claim on investigate, to at least
Okay.
investigate.
So she's claiming that the agenda just broadly listed something like commissioner's report, right? I forget what the heading of the third agenda item was, but it was something just simple like that.
Right.
But within that was this very controversial vote about withholding funding. Usually apparently precedent, according to Opens Meeting Act laws and precedent, that's not, if there's a vote of that magnitude, that has to be specified on the agenda ahead of time so interested parties can have a chance to participate and view. Is that your understanding of the Open Meetings Act? And if that's true, how would you judge as an attorney what that Council on Education did?
So yes, that is correct. You know, broad headings that don't cover something as significant as funding or disapproval of funding to certain groups, those would be very obviously interesting subjects for people who are going to be affected by them. And I'm very well aware of the precedent that is used in these Open Meetings Acts. I've served on one of the Coventry Fire District fire boards, and we were very cognizant to make sure that when we were discussing something of that magnitude, a very specific entry was made on the agenda to make sure that people were aware of that because of that precedent. And that's something that the Attorney General, the Open Meetings Unit, the Opens Meeting Unit always cite to their past decisions or Superior Court decisions or Supreme Court decisions to point out that it has to put the public on notice of what exactly is going to be discussed and what exactly is going to be voted on to be in compliance with the Open Meetings Act.
All right, before we go any further, and I should have said this right off the bat, because our center in this production is nonpartisan, non-political organization. I mean, we have our public policy views, but we're not allowed to get involved in campaigns, elections, or anything like that. So I should inform our viewers that you are a candidate, or an announced candidate, a filed candidate, as I understand it, to run for Attorney General next year. So I want to put our audience on notice about that, but also put you on notice that we have to avoid any campaigning or, here's why, Nerona is good or bad, you're likely candidate, right? Let's just stick with the legal analysis. And I will invite the Attorney General, as I need to do, to come on this show and to either rebut anything you said or to rebut the issue at hand. Whether he accepts or not, that's up to him. So I just want to put that notice and disclaimer out there. Okay, so it appears now, Laurie Gaddis Barrett, who was just on with us, she filed a letter to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General is going to investigate. Now, the town of Foster on Monday night filed a letter along a similar vein. Legally, are those two separate investigations? Once he accepts one, is he basically accepting the others? Or how would that work from an Attorney General's point of view?
I mean, if the claims are generally the same, it would seem to me to be efficient. I don't think there's a specific law that requires him to treat them as one or two. But basically, if he finds it to be efficient to investigate them all as one specific violation, he can do that. But since they're against different entities, he could make decisions that would be different for Foster or Gloucester in this particular case.
All right. Let's get to the larger issue of the governor's newly declared state of emergency and subsequent executive orders after the General Assembly ended the executive branch's original declared state of emergency, which was extended, 14 or 15 times, over the last 14 or 15 months. He's claiming, the governor, McKee, that the Delta variant presents a new and different emergency than the original coronavirus strain. Will that hold legal water?
Well, in my opinion, no. I think the governor so much acknowledged that because he called the General Assembly back into session so they could theoretically ratify his executive action.
Wait a minute, hold on. That's a great point. He seems so uncertain of his legal standing that he actually, right, he actually said, hey, General Assembly, please come back into session and ratify this, right?
He did make that call, Mike. And I think when you had a response from the Speaker of the House, the Senate President that said, we don't need to come back into session. We're okay with what he does. I mean, with all due respect to them, they don't make the decisions. There has to be an affirmative vote by concurrent resolution of both chambers of the General Assembly.
Assuming that the law they passed in June and as part of the budget applied, which effectively ended. So, but see, this is where it gets tricky. The government's saying, well, that old law applied to the original declaration. This is a whole new declaration.
Well, if you look at the original declaration of emergency that had been extended 15 or so times, that was issued by then Governor Raimondo.
Right.
And you look at Governor McKee's new declaration of emergency, and I'm using new, I believe, a little charitably, but they basically are based on the same health concerns, public health concerns. Yeah, he does mention the Delta variant, but this is basically a COVID-19 state of emergency that we've been under since March of 2020. And in my view, there is nothing different, new, or something that was unknown or unforeseeable. In this case, that would
it certainly appears that way to me and everyone else as a layman. But can you think of any legal distinction that would allow those two things to be separate things?
Well, it would be a question of fact. If somebody were to challenge the governor's authority, it'd be a question of fact at that point to bring it to a court, of the Superior Court, likely of competent jurisdiction, and ask them to make a determination, declaratory judgment perhaps, of whether or not the governor's newest declaration of emergency is factually distinct from that was issued and terminated by the General Assembly when Governor Raimondo issued it.
Now you wrote, and this is probably more of an opinion than a legal position, but you wrote in a statement that was published on the Coalition Radio Network. At least that's where I saw your statement. You quote, the governor's clear intent was to give himself, the schools, and all those in favor of universal mask mandates at least 180 days before the General Assembly would have to authorize the order, a clear overreach of the governor's executive emergency authority. So in issuing the new state declaration of emergency, the governor's trying to grant himself basically a free 180 more days of executive authority. Is that correct?
Yes, because when they passed the budget, they said that all future emergencies are limited to no more than 180 days without General Assembly approval. So if they're out of session and he gets up to 180 days, I mean, at that point, it's up to someone to challenge his power.
Now, okay. Staying with what the town of Gloucester did, and I'm also going to mention Representative Patricia Morgan. She is the founder of the Stop School Indoctrination Now group that Laurie Gaddis Barrett is also part of. I know that Patricia Morgan, the representative from Coventry and West Warwick, sent a letter to the Attorney General. And we know that on Monday evening, the town of Gloucester is filing a letter with the Attorney General saying that this recent declaration of a state of emergency by the governor is illegal and violates the law that was just passed and enacted in July. And you publicly called on the Attorney General, as I'm reading from your statement again, the state's chief law enforcement officer, to review the governor's executive orders, the recent ones, to determine whether or not he's complied with state law. And if not, take immediate legal action seeking to restrain and enjoin the governor from abusing the power of his office. Okay, so here's the question. We all agree that this should be reviewed. But does the Attorney General have the unilateral authority to end that, or does it need to go to court?
he does not have the unilateral authority to end the declaration of emergency by himself. He has the authority by virtue of his constitutional role as the Attorney General to have standing to challenge the governor's authority to ensure that the law is enforced, or seek a declaratory judgment or seek an injunction if he were to believe that the law was not being properly applied or enforced. And that's what I called upon Attorney General Noronha to do. And I think there were several others, like you mentioned, who also called upon him to make an independent review and take action if necessary, because we are.
And that action again specifically would be what? The action you're
seeking either an injunction if he believes it himself to be unlawful, or perhaps,
basically to sue the governor himself.
yeah, we're not
Do we
talking about
really
suing
think that
for
will
money.
happen? Do we
No,
really
I
think-
don't believe that will happen. I don't believe that will happen, but he does have the authority, is my point, that he has the authority by being the chief law enforcement
All right.
officer of the state to seek that action. And, we're not talking about money damages. We're talking about, a court saying, I'm sorry, Governor, but we find that you have exceeded your authority and we're going to stop you with an injunction from enforcing that executive order.
Would that action and request for injunction happen if you were sitting in the AG's chair right now?
From what I'm reading and what I've read with the current law as it's been amended and the governor's declaration, I think there's a very strong ground that I would be seeking legal action to enjoin the governor from further enforcing this order.
All right, one last question, Charles Calenda, and thank you again for your time. Broader topic, kind of more federal issue here, critical race theory. Another, a lot of people have brought up, but again, I reference Representative Patricia Morgan, who I showed it on the show the other day when we had Judge Flanders on. She's also written a letter to the Attorney General, but Attorney General is pretty busy these days, I'll tell you that. But claiming that any school district that teaches critical race theory and any race-based issue that favors or demeans one racial group of people over another is a violation of the federal Civil Rights Act that was passed, 40, 50 years ago. Do you have, and it seems obvious, right, that no race should be, again, if you're a Supreme Court justice now, let's think 20 years in the future when you're on the Supreme Court. What would be the thinking and the way to evaluate that claim?
When you're looking at a federal discrimination claim for a protected class, you have to look and determine whether or not the government action, when it's based on race, is critically necessary. So basically, the highest standard of review. And you have to show that there is really no other alternative for this government regulation that would serve this compelling government need. That's the standard that a court would have to review this under. And quite frankly, I don't see what the compelling government need would be to teach that one race needs to be treated differently than another race, because
social equity is not an appropriate government need. So-called social equity.
I'm sure so many people define that in a different way, Mike, that they could probably go round and round in circles. But I'm aware of no law, no case law that says one race is entitled to be treated above another race. In fact, all our case law since the Civil Rights Act has been passed has been the opposite.
All right, Charles Calenda, thank you. We'll have you back. I've got to be fair about this. Like we said, I've got to give the sitting Attorney General. Well, I don't know. I don't even know. Well, let me ask you this. Is he announced yet to run again for next time?
I have not heard him actually speak about
Well,
his.
if he's not an
reelection.
announced candidate, then I don't know if I have that burden or not, but I'll invite him anyway. Certainly I have to invite equal time to all announced candidates, but I think we all assume he's going to run again. I mean, some say he might run for governor, so who knows? Okay, Charles Calenda, but either way, we'll have you back.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
for
me.
weighing in, and thank you for being a defender of liberty, and we'll look forward to talking with you next time in the dugout.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Folks, this is getting crazy. Parents, the parent groups I've talked to, and I'm sure Laurie, Gaddis, Barrett, who was just on, and Jessica, the Senator, Jessica De La Cruz as a parent, and all the other parent groups, while they're concerned about this issue, mask mandates now, vaccination mandates now, passports, Their larger concern is this trend of government interfering with and infringing on their rights as a parent. They believe this issue is important in setting precedent and drawing the line on where the government can go and where the government can't go when it comes to the education of their children. There are many, many fights beyond COVID mandates, beyond CRT that will be happening in the future. Religious freedoms, the transgender issue, the over-sexualization teaching of our kids. I mean, there's so many issues that certainly, and these parents understand that systematically it appears the government is trying to step in and become the parent. That's not acceptable in our society, and it's certainly not acceptable to these parents. This is what this is about. It's not about whether these people are smart or ignorant in how to deal with the pandemic. This is about parental rights. So just keep that in mind as these debates unfold. They see what's coming down the road. They can sense it. And they're taking a stand now, as they should. And we applaud them. Once again, on this sad day, I want to send my condolences, God's blessings, if it be his will, over those who have been injured, killed, or otherwise have lost a loved one in Afghanistan, and for the safe return of all other Americans to their native homeland. It's a sad day for America. It's a sad period for this state with this government overreach in so many forms that it's taking. And we're so glad to have people like our three guests today who are willing to stand up and speak out in defense of freedom. We'll see you next week on In the Dugout. Mike Stenhouse, good day.